This week on the Eldritch Lorecast.
I refuse to call it Sigil.
I'm sticking with Sigil.
Makes it sound like we're blackmailing them to come on the podcast.
Yeah, wizards. We just want to talk.
Come at me.
Dael, you'll piss off the Planescape fans. There's dozens of them.
Justice talked about it being the biggest and best starter set ever. Okay. Well, we'll see.
How many people are bringing their laptops to a D&D table?
Literal goddamn potato.
The amount of lonely fun potential that we're finding here, I think, is incredible.
All of that and more right now.
Hello, and welcome to the Eldritch Lorecast. My name is James Hake. I'm filling in for the intrepid Ben Byrne. After last week, I infiltrated his home and stole his hosting powers. And we are joined, as always, by Dael Kingsmill and Shawn Merwin. Ben is sick this week. Wish him well. Hope he rests up. I know there's a lot on his plate, so he could use a little bit of recovery. But today, let's find out what's going on in the world of D&D and RPGs on this, the number one RPG podcast in all the realms.
They said it. They said the thing.
Leading with such hard-hitting questions as Dael Kingsmill, how many Mr. Potato Head beholders can I put you down for as a pre-order? 3, 10?
I'm not going to lie to you. It's the funnest product concept I've heard in a while. Now, I'm not a buyer of things, but if I were to buy a thing, this might be a thing I might buy.
Yeah, as far as Hasbro IP crossovers can go, WizKids is releasing this later in the year for about $24.99 USD. It's got interchangeable eye stalks, lips, central eye. They've done the potato head concept pretty well with all the interchangeable parts. Can we think of any better corporately driven Hasbro IP crossover into D&D than this?
Well, it's definitely better than a My Little Pony with eyes coming out of it, I guess.
Yeah.
So, I'm just I
mean, maybe I could go for a Transformer. That could be fun. I haven't seen one yet, though. So of all the existing stuff, big fan.
I know that a couple of years ago, maybe it was when the D&D movie came out, they had a sort of Transformer thing where there was a big 20-sided die that could unfurl into an owlbear and maybe some other ones too.
Yeah, I think there was a dragon and an owlbear. But I don't know. Somehow it doesn't ping quite the same thing. That feels more like, what was that anime, Bakugan?
Oh, yeah.
Or, it felt a little more in that vein than it did a Transformer. But maybe that's just because a 20-sided die doesn't feel as cool as a car.
You take that back. I need to ask this now. It may be a fact that I am maybe a couple years older than everyone else here. Did you own Mr. Potato Heads when you were youngins?
Oh yeah.
I didn't own one, but my older cousins owned one, which for me was the same thing. I'm the youngest of 4 and the youngest of a lot of cousins.
Gotcha.
So it was a lot of hand-me-downs. Yeah.
Was yours a big plastic brown blob with little slots that you would then insert ears and see? Now the Mr. Potato Head I played with was a literal goddamn potato.
I was about to ask, how did it originate as a potato that you stick arms and legs into?
Abso-freaking-lutely. You got the eyes and the ears and the nose and the lips and the glasses and the hats and all the little things, but they were not inserted into a big plastic thing. They were inserted into a real potato that you had to provide. And that got me thinking about the perfect D&D mini, which is just a potato sitting on a little stand. That's what
the
I
best
want.
back in my day I've ever heard, actually.
Thank you.
This is the ultimate form of using M&Ms as monster minis to kill the dragon fried potato.
Your Reese's cups, your Hershey's Kisses, and a big honking potato. I am there for this. Let's do this.
Shawn, how was Winter Fantasy?
Winter Fantasy was cool.
I don't go to many US cons, weirdly enough. I feel like I go to Australian cons about as often as I go to US cons these days. What goes on in Winter Fantasy for the people in our audience who aren't familiar?
So Winter Fantasy started back in the 70s. And it was, as most of these conventions were, in Wisconsin at Lake Geneva in I believe it was the American Legion Hall. So we're talking, right, a little tiny building. And like a lot of the conventions that slowly started to grow along with D&D, it moved from its home in Lake Geneva to Milwaukee. And then it sort of outgrew Milwaukee, so it moved to Chicago. And this was in the time when TSR was starting to grow and then decline. So we had a small bit of time where it was in Chicago, and then it moved with the start of 3rd edition to Fort Wayne, Indiana. And so 3rd edition and the beginning of the Living Greyhawk campaign had its home for about 3 years, Winter Fantasy did, in Fort Wayne. And it became a big RPGA sort of event where there were not only D&D campaigns, but other campaigns from other games would run there. It slowly grew to the point that they moved it to, of all places, the Meadowlands in East Rutherford, New Jersey. So where the Giants and the Jets, American football teams, play, right across the river from Manhattan. It was there for a year. And that was the first time I went. And it was in this absolutely enormous hall. You couldn't even see the other side of the hall when you entered, basically. It was huge. And it went from there to Washington, D.C. And 4th edition had its preview at one of these big hotels in Crystal City, Virginia, which is in Washington, D.C.
That's a very fantasy name, by the way. I want to take my players to Crystal City.
Exactly. But at this point, Wizards was dumping hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars into these shows to rival like Gen Con almost. And then they sort of backed off and they stopped calling it Winter Fantasy. They called it the D&D Experience. And then they just sort of cut it out altogether. And Bald Man Games picked it up and started to continue to run it by moving it back to Fort Wayne, Indiana, where you can buy a hotel room for $1.50, which is kind of nice, as opposed to Crystal City or New York City or Chicago.
Yeah.
And so it's been back in the Grand Wayne Convention Center in downtown Fort Wayne, Indiana since 2009. And it's contracted in size with the contraction of organized play from Wizards like the Adventurers League. So it's only a few hundred people, but it's so fun because everyone is there to just play games. It's just sit down and let's play some D&D. And that's what we did this year, including a preview of the upcoming Grim Hollow organized play campaign coming from Ghostfire.
Yes.
We ran the epic that had played at Gen Con, Raid the Blood-Drenched Shores. And then we had a preview adventure written by Andy Demps called The Deathly Rift, which was sort of a precursor to the Darkfall. And we are doing all of this to get ready for the grand launch of this organized play campaign at Gen Con this year, 2025.
I was just about to ask, Shawn, so if you didn't go to Winter Fantasy this year and you want to play the new Grim Hollow Adventures organized play style, where else can you do it? Is it just at Gen Con coming up?
It's going to launch at Gen Con, and then we will have more information both about the campaign, where you can play, how to build the characters. All that is still being hashed out, but we will be up and running and ready to go by the time Gen Con hits in August.
And then, so maybe in the future at other cons after Gen Con, you might get some Grim Hollow organized play.
What I'm guessing is you'll be able to go to conventions and play. You will also be able to go play anywhere. You'll be able to play at your home. But there may be some perks for going to a convention to play. There may be some games that you could only play at a convention as opposed to playing anywhere. We're still working on those details, but it's definitely going to be something where we want the community to come together.
Well, I can already see Aussies in chat getting excited for PAX Oz. So fingers crossed we can do it there.
I would just like to point out that Winter Fantasy sounds like a homecoming theme.
At one point, Winter Fantasy was also the name of a dating convention in Australia, and D&D apparently stood for Dateless and Desperate or something like that. And so it was D&D Winter Fantasy, and everyone was like, we're like, no,
that feels
something.
like a deliberate jab almost.
I'd like to see the D&D experience as a homecoming theme.
It feels like, oh, we're gonna make our dating convention is gonna be called Winter Fantasy. You mean like the D&D thing? Oh, I'll show you D&D, dateless and desperate. There you go.
Let's kick it off with some real D&D news. Fresh from Wizards of the Coast, Project Sigil.
Fresh.
The D&D virtual tabletop. And I'm sticking with it.
I refuse to call it Sigil.
I'm sticking with Sigil.
Sigil sounds magic. Sigil sounds like I let a child name a bunny rabbit.
Dael, you'll piss off the Planescape fans. There's dozens of them.
Come at me. Come at me.
When the creator of Planescape said, Sigil, that's stupid. That's when I said, okay, Sigil, I'm going to stick with Sigil.
What Planescape creator are we talking about here, Shawn?
Oh,
what was it? Dave Zeb Cook? Is that the one?
Yes, thank you.
Dave Zeb Cook's wishes, irrespective. I'm sticking with Sigil because it makes me giggle.
When you say Sigil, I'm going to say Seagal, and then we'll be in trouble.
But what is Project Sigil? Well, we've talked about it a lot on this show. It's the very fancy Unreal Engine powered D&D virtual tabletop that was announced 2 years ago now. It is available now to anyone with a D&D Beyond account and a Windows computer. It's accessible based on your level of D&D Beyond subscription. Master tier subscribers appear to have access to the most content. Those full features involving the 3D mini builder, a 3D map maker, and D&D Beyond integration to import characters, monsters, etc. And I have not yet had the chance to play around with this. To be honest, until just a moment ago, I was still convinced that this release was something of an open beta.
It is the full release. It is. Anyone can use it, yeah.
It really did sneak up on me, though. I didn't know that it had been released. It was just like, oh, you're here.
Was it last Gen Con? It was the live play DM'd by Brendan Lee Mulligan with several Baldur's Gate 3 actors.
Oh, Scarlet Moth is pointing out that it was actually DM'd by
was it Abria?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That does actually seem...
That's an important thing to consider. But I remember when we talked about it on the Lorecast, it was sort of the game went great up until they got the virtual tabletop involved, and then all the wheels fell off. It feels like it hasn't had that great of press leading up. You would think there would have been a huge media blitz, right?
I think the issue that they had during that live game is sort of the issue with technology in general and with this in particular, which is you play the game to interact with folks and laugh and have fun and do the things that D&D allows you to do. Part of that fun can be looking at a 3D virtual tabletop and watching fireballs being cast, acid being spit by ant kegs, etc., etc. But that's not for everyone. I think that's why this hasn't been trumpeted as much as it might otherwise, because there's still this idea of what do we do with it?
There are a couple of layers of it that are interesting to me, because there was a lot of fanfare around, hey, we're going to do a VTT, and a lot of buzz around it at the beginning. We're making videos to show you where we're at already. You know, there's a lot of talk early on. It seems to me almost as though, and this is speculation, but I wonder how much of it is that, you know, Wizards took a look and they saw how many, you know, new players are coming to the game and playing online. You know, making friends online, playing online, not playing in person. It's a huge factor. I don't know what happened in between then and now. Maybe there was more market research and they were like, oh, they actually just are happy to play on Discord, or maybe they looked and they realized that I don't know. And even things like the fact that it's only available on Windows. And I'm a Windows person through and through and always have been, but a lot of people only have their MacBook or whatever. So then it becomes like a weird accessibility thing there. So it's not as widespread. Or their iPad, yeah.
How many people are bringing their laptops to a D&D table?
Yes.
Not many that I've seen.
And so that becomes like a weird little thing in there. I don't mean to be overly critical of it. I'm just a little confused by it. There are lots of elements of it that I do think sound really exciting. I think, you know, for a really long time, the only big thing that this VTT had going for it versus other ones was that you get that D&D Beyond integration. But things now, like having the mini builder in the program, that's kind of huge. If you can use that to make NPCs as well, that would be huge. That would be massive. If you could use it to make monsters, that would be beyond, you know? So I'm kind of excited that they've got that, because even Tailspire, which to my mind is kind of the nearest competitor to what the Sigil VTT is trying to do, Tailspire lets you import Hero Forge minis as player characters, I understand. But I haven't been on it in a while, so maybe it's updated. But, you know, there's no inbuilt one that you can kind of play around with. So that's kind of a fun little Sims, create a sim sort of element to add into the mix. So there are lots of like good little things in there. But I am kind of bewildered by this rollout.
It does make me wonder if they've lost a bit of the Baldur's Gate 3 shine, right? When everyone was playing BG3 and it was at the top of the news every week, basically, the idea of playing D&D in a fully rendered 3D virtual environment, I think, was very appealing. And now that sort of buzz has worn off, we're like, what, 1-2 years away from the release of BG3 now? It's like, well, I don't need that. I've remembered how good it is to just hop on a Discord call and just like theater the mind dead.
Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting as well, as being pointed out in chat, that it's much harder to develop for Mac as an operating system, which I completely agree with. But if Hasbro are making this bold claim of we're going into, you know, putting our eggs in the basket of video games, you know, as they did a couple months back, you got to be able to handle stuff like that. Hasbro, come on.
Do we think that this is like a good way to bring new players into the game? It strikes me as, you know, with such a toy box environment, it's good for a couple of people. It's good for streamers who want a more visual element to their gameplay rather than it being more of a podcast. But there might be a case for new players, right? Where that sort of added dimension is more immersive.
It's true. If you do the work to make it very easy for the player to step in.
Yes.
And who ends up having to do the work? Right now, it's a game master will have to sit down. And I've used the system. It's wonderful. You can build really nice themes. You can build characters. You can do this, but it's work. If you want the player to just be, the new player to be able to sit down and say, oh, teach me about this game. Here's a new medium that they can use. But is it any easier to do than sitting down with a pre-generated character or with a new starter set, news to come? Or if you can do it, but that takes more work than just building a 3D terrain set.
So true. And I think a lot of that is going to come down to how easy they make it for people to share stuff that they have made for themselves. Because, you know, if you think about Tailspire, if you look at what MCDM are working towards with their tabletop, with their VTT, the codex, it's really, there's a big focus on like, hey, you make the thing, and then we make a space where you can share it and other people can use it. Whether that be a marketplace, whether it be for free or whatever, but you know, you can have a sort of built-in little economy there if you make it easy. And I think that would be something that I would be really emphasizing, because there are a lot of people who are really good at that sort of thing, building a map, building a really detailed sort of location, and they enjoy spending time on it. That's their big thing. I love to look at those. And I would love to copy and paste them into my setting. I think that would be great. I think that would be delightful. And I think it's interesting that you brought up streamers, James, because I remember early on that we talked about it as though it probably was targeting streamers. But again, as part of this sort of secret soft launch, I feel like I haven't seen many D&D. Maybe I'm just following the wrong people. I haven't personally seen any D&D streamers making use of this yet. Whereas, you know, there were seasons of Dimension 20. Zach Nahum used Tailspire. You know, there is something there for streamers to be putting out this idea of look how fun and cool this is, that would bring in people, I think. But
Michael in chat says you will be able to build bastions with it.
It's pretty cool.
There's a cool example of something that it would be great for. Even if you're not playing at the moment, you can go in and say, hey, look, these are the rooms and this is what it looks like.
And, you know, the number of people who love to just fuss around in The Sims making houses. I mean, it seems if they've got a house builder, they've
already got the creator sim.
Yeah.
So you got those people. Get the house building, the build mode people. The play people will come.
the amount of lonely fun potential that we're finding here, I think, is incredible. Just for making your own stuff away from the game itself. I don't know. Maybe there's something to this sort of more organic discovery approach that this soft launch is encouraging, right? It does seem like if there is a huge top-down media blitz of every influencer on your YouTube recommended page being, it's a Project Sigil, then it's like, okay, maybe I'm a little overwhelmed. Maybe seeing one and then another sort of over a little bit might make it feel like you have a more personal connection.
To be fair, I mean, I feel like the layoffs might have caught some key people in terms of like maybe reaching out to creators. Like maybe there was a person whose job that was and then they're not there anymore.
Am I being a little naive here, perhaps? Speaking of new players, though, and their ability to be brought into the game, we have some late-breaking news here about a brand new D&D starter set. The first for this new rules revamp, just announced by Justice Arman, one of the big game designers over at D&D, Heroes of the Borderlands, leaning into the classic D&D adventure Keep on the Borderlands. Just a brief teaser out on YouTube right now, but it's very interesting to see how much of this new, improved, and big boxed set leans into its new player acquisition with cards and custom-tailored character sheets. And, well, it seems like every time they release a starter set, they're shaking up how they want to onboard new players. And this one, if I may be so bold, makes me think a little bit of Daggerheart, with its spell cards and background cards and ancestry cards. Well, it's like everything that the Daggerheart offering did. Shawn, you brought this to our attention. Yeah. What are your thoughts on it?
My thoughts on it are, we've known that this box set was out there, but information has been coming in dribs and drabs. And so apparently they previewed it at the New York Toy Fair that just happened this past week, a big toy expo in New York City. And so they wanted to get out into the world a little bit more about it. So Justice talked about it being the biggest and best starter set ever. Okay, well, we'll see. What I loved him saying was, open the box, start playing, and learn as you go. And that's one thing that we've never had from a D&D edition that I've seen, is a way to bring in new players that comes from Wizards, not from DMs interpreting what Wizards wants, and actually saying, sit down and start reading this, and you will build your character as you go. You will play as you go. And there won't be this big, weird thing where either I have to explain this pre-gen for you, or we have to build your character and I have to wait 2 hours before we actually roll dice. And so I'm heartened by this. And that, like you said, James, this is a potentially borrowed system, learning from the great design of all the other designers in the industry, of let's build the character, but not create the character before we start. Take this tile. I think they called it a tile-based system. Put this tile down, and this is what you get from this choice you made, whether it's your species or your heritage or your background. And if you can do that and show the game off as you build your character, you're also telling stories, and you're also rolling dice, and you're also having fun with the people around you, then you have come close to capturing the magic while also capturing the imagination at the same time.
One thing I'll say from the short preview of materials that we saw, I looked really close at that character sheet. And one thing I really liked about it is how all of this character building material seems made from the ground up for the current edition of the Player's Handbook. And the reason I say that is this, not because the mechanics or the capitalization of words is one way or another, that's aesthetic. What I'm talking about is the order in which you create your character, right? These sheets are all class first, which is, you'll see now in the new Player's Handbook, that's what comes first. And then from there, it says, select your origin. And it gives you a couple of recommendations based on your class, about your ancestry and about your background. And it's all done in the order that the Player's Handbook does it. This new system is guiding you to create characters in the way that the current version of the game encourages you to do so. That sort of introduction of the style of play they're looking for is the sort of aesthetic polish and streamlining, not aesthetic, the sort of polishing of flow of the game that D&D often feels like it lacks. That's the sort of trade-off we get for having a highly community content-driven game, is that it's full of little rough edges and corners. And I think if Wizards wants to make a really top-down game, which we can then break if we want to, I think they're finally doing it the right way round this time.
Something that I think is so key to a really good starter set, no matter what TTRPG system, I think it is so key to have it be a tactile experience. I think if you are getting someone started, almost regardless of age, it is so important for them to have things that they can get in and muck around with. And I think that cards are such a simple way of doing that. There is something fun about cards. If you give me all my spells, each on a card, love it, big fan. And I think what it does in a big way as a teaching element is that it takes something that it's already how the system works. You're already basically, pick a class tile, pick an origin tile. That's already how it works. But we've all just developed the sort of mental muscles to hold that information in our heads and navigate the character sheet where we have to sort of reference those different things and tie them together. And someone who's brand new doesn't have those mental muscles yet. So giving them just something they can hold, that they can build a little pile or lay them out in front of themselves. And I know I've said this before, it's not new information, but it is so important to give them a thing that physicalizes that thought process until they've learned how to do it in their head.
Another common 4th edition dub. Let's just say it.
Yes. Let's say it. Let's say it. And maybe 4th edition did it in part because there was so much to remember that it was impossible to put it all on a character sheet. Maybe that's part of why that happened. But we can take the good elements of that and apply them now.
Right. And think about when you've learned or you've tried to teach people about D&D and you give them a pre-gen and they sit there and, okay, you're the fighter and you get to hit something with your sword. Here are your bonuses and stuff. Okay, you're the wizard. You get to cast these 6 spells. Oh, they're not on the character sheet. Well, okay, we're going to have to go to the book to figure it, right? If you can do that so you don't have to run off and download 4 other documents in order to play, you've taken a huge burden off the game master, right? Off the players, the other players, yourself. It's great.
I'm also curious about some of the B-roll they were using in this. This is kind of our last little gasp of content to squeeze out of this, I think. But there were shots of people from the Wizard's office running a game of the starter set with Chris Perkins at the DM's helm. It's been a hot sec since I've seen Chris in the DM's chair because he has been reasonably detained by the creation of the core rule books. And so I'm curious to see if this is a sign of actual play to come.
Rumors are that at Gen Con this past year, they were running sort of play tests of it, of the box, of the beginner starter set. So I don't know if that's where it was taken or a convention since then, but I know this has been in the planning stages for a while, which tends to bode well.
Speaking of new inventions and tech added to the D&D sphere, the Artificer. There's been an Unearthed Arcana for the 2 upcoming Eberron books that we know about. I've read them. I'm not a big Eberron player, though I like it. Any thoughts?
I did not read this.
Good talk.
I've really been letting the team down for a very long time as someone who just is not very interested in the Artificer. And I think part of that is that as I've complained about many a time, and Ben isn't here to back me up this time. I miss him. No, but Ben and I always complain about the way that they overly magicify stuff. And I think for me, that is most evidenced, at least in the well, it wasn't 2014, but whenever the 2014 5e version of an Artificer came out, you get a lot of that. Where it's like, I want to be Iron Man in a cave with a box of scraps, but you're making me like manifest a thing out of thin air. And that's not what my fantasy is. So I'm more hyped to see, I mean, look, it's not coming up anytime soon by the sounds of things. But, I want to see the MCDM take on it. I want to see, other companies do their takes on this. And I want to feel that kind of base fantasy come out. And as a result, I have not read this new Artificer. So maybe it's better and I just will never know.
I have said this before on the Lorecast, but I think the Artificer as a class is ill-suited to 5e as a game. Very well suited to 3rd edition. I never saw the 4e Artificer, so I couldn't say. But 5e, it's just the wrong system for it, and so I think they're just building on a poor foundation, really by no fault of their own. Actually,
yeah. If I was playing in Eberron, or if I was playing in Ravnica, and I was a little bit more sort of like immersed in those settings, maybe I would get over myself.
Yeah.
But as it stands, I am not. And so I don't have to.
I was more interested in the dragon marks, to be honest.
Yes.
Because that is one of those things that, as you said, James, was like the Artificer was perfect for 3rd edition, but trying to bring what the dragon marks mean into other editions where the rules are different makes for sort of an awkward transition. And so they put in these feats to represent the dragon marks, and which I think is okay, but they are not origin feats. The category is dragon mark. Where do you get them? When do you get them? Do you take them instead of an origin feat? If that's the case, then people who have a build that they want are going to be rankled because they need to take a dragon mark feat. And if this was covered in the article, I missed it. So then at 4th level, when you get to take your first non-origin feat, you can take the greater version of the mark of detection, the mark of finding, etc. Then you're not able to take this other feat that you might have wanted, or just an ability score increase feat. So you're asking dragon mark players to make that sacrifice, which is exactly why when we were working on transformations for the new 2024 rules for Grim Hollow, we thought about making transformations feats, but then we realized how bad players would take it if they had to not take one of their favorite feats for their character because they either wanted or were forced to take a transformation. So I'm wondering where that is going to end up in terms of this rules matching the history and the story of these dragon marks.
That's a very good point. A bit of Eberron lore that I'm trying to recall, if I remember right, is when dragon marks manifest, right? I think the general opinion is that they're, something you're born with, but they can manifest on you, mm-hmm. and their powers and appearance can manifest later in life. Is that right, or am I misremembering here? Because, 3rd edition was flush with feats, right? You did get one at 1st level, which often was taken as a dragon mark feat, but I'm pretty sure you could also take it later on, which is how it was tried to be in the earlier 5e Eberron book.
I'm trying to even remember because it's been a bit. It's been a hot minute, not a hot second.
Since?
Yes. So just hard to shuffle it in. And yes, I think you can take them later, or you can manifest an aberrant dragon mark,
right,
which is one that is not associated with any of the dragon marked houses.
Clearly, we need someone a little more well-versed in Eberron on this podcast sometime to talk about it. Would be cool if we could get someone. I know a handful, but they're all kind of tied up in Wizards, which might make it a bit difficult. Not that we have any trouble getting people from Wizards on the show. We had Justice and Mac and Latia and Sarah Chaffee on here before. I think with the right bit of leverage, we could do it. And that would be a great talk.
Leverage makes it sound like we're blackmailing them to come on the podcast.
Yeah, Wizards. We just want to talk.
When he said tied up, he didn't mean literally tied up, as far as we know.
Ernie Gygax, the originator of the wizard Tensor and his related spells, and one of the earliest co-designers of D&D, has passed away this past week. Luke Gygax, another one of Gary Gygax's sons shared the news with everyone. And it's always a sad day when the people who's left an early and indelible mark on D&D passes away. You know, I did not know Ernie. Shawn, you might have met him at one of those conventions. I'm not sure.
No, I can't say. I've seen him, but never sat down and chatted.
Yeah.
But like you say, you know, somebody who was there at the founding of it, one of the original play testers, if you will obviously have an impact on the product that has come down through the ages. So,
yeah,
you know, condolences to the family.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the Gygax family is one that can not be separated from the name of D&D. So, yeah, our condolences to them. Mac's question about mega dungeons, something that harkens back to that era of classic D&D design. Let's talk about the elements of classic mega dungeon design. Ben asks specifically about the city of Drakenheim, but I want to broaden this out to anything that might include something like Gary Gygax's Temple of Elemental Evil, any of those early things. What to you are some of the classic elements of a mega dungeon? What would you do if you had to make a new one right now? Its core pillars.
For me, a mega dungeon, the thing that would entice me the most about a mega dungeon is really leaning into those elements of play that are largely not very popular at the moment, which are, you know, exploration, not travel, but exploration, and also resource management. So the things that I love when I think about a mega dungeon or dungeon delving in a game are, I think, sort of Five Torches Deep style. Like, the whole point is that you have to make sure you have enough to get you in and get you back out to somewhere safe again. Or, you know, the idea of having to find safe places in an unsafe environment to rest for the night, the difficulty of finding a solid long rest. I think, you know, we talk about what are they called? Gritty rest rules or something along those lines when we talk about 5e, the way that it's currently played. It's like you need to impose something new on it to make long rests feel right and balance out the game. But if you're in a dungeon, the long rest as is, that's what it's built for. You know what I mean? Because you might not get your long rest. You have to really put in a lot of sort of effort to making sure that works out the way that you hope it will. But I also, like, I've often dreamed about the things that you could do with a really proper dungeon delve mega dungeon. I would love to do a sort of Theros style setting where you're going into a half sunken Mediterranean sea caves where there's treasures hidden and there's, you know, sort of elements that are shipwrecky, but like, how did it get in here? A little bit Goonies, like really, really mess with that kind of thing in the exploration of it, and that enticing of players to go just a little bit further, like the siren call is singing for them to come deeper. That's the kind of stuff that I love.
Your metaphor got very nautical there. I love that.
I hear the mermaids singing each to each.
Yeah, I mean, what Dael said, right? It's there's a style of play that is enticing when you do a mega dungeon. If you think of the mega-est of mega dungeons, I think of Undermountain. And that is one of those places where there's an overstory to it, but then there's also a story for each of the levels. And you sort of need that meta narrative that keeps players going back in the short term and then coming back in the long term. And you need a rule set, as Dael said, that has this press your luck kind of thing, where if we leave now or if we try to get out, there will be consequences. Maybe that next room has the pool that if we drink from will heal us. Maybe if we hit that next room, we will find the secret and exit that will take us back to the city. If we take that one more risk, just maybe. Ooh. And the rules that the game have need to accompany that. That's why Shadow Dark right now is such a hugely popular game, especially with the old school crowd, because it has that dangerous, gritty, press your luck sort of feel to it.
And it also makes me think as well, like the value of doing something like in my sort of treasure hunting scenario, chucking in other treasure hunters who are also going in. And if you don't go further right now, they're going to get the loot, you know, that sort of just really, it's press your luck. It's or it's press your luck and it's sort of a fear of missing out at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that discovery is the most important pillar of a mega dungeon, because, storytelling in the way that we think about it is not really at the core of many mega dungeons. We like a plot that unfolds is a little bit too linear for the kind of gameplay that you want here, right? All of my mega dungeon experience happened in video games. It happened in games like Super Metroid and Dark Souls, and all of those games have very, very sort of big picture, broad stories, right? If you play Dark Souls, all your story stuff is coming from item descriptions and very sort of cryptic NPC dialogue, and is all kind of pieced together after the fact. You go online and watch lore videos. And that's kind of the way it works in a tabletop mega dungeon too, where you are using environmental storytelling and snippets of things that happened, before you even entered the dungeon to piece together why things are the way they are now. And I think that can be really compelling. I just rarely see it done in a way that compels me as a dungeon master when I read the text. So like when I popped open Dungeon of the Mad Mage, for example, all of those floors are really cool. They have their own theme, and it's all explained a little bit, it's explained well at the beginning of the chapter, why this area is the way it is. But when I go to each individual room, it's usually, and there's 10 wolves and 50 GP in their bone pile. And I'm like, oh, well, okay, cool. This encounter then is 5 wolves and a pile of remains they can look through. That's the sort of thing I want from someone who's making a mega dungeon. Is I want them to inject a little bit of life and intrigue into every room, rather than leaving it on me as the DM to kind of extrapolate back. Find ways to tell me as a DM how I might be able to draw the players into the narrative on the sort of atomic encounter level of every area.
Every encounter needs one cool thing, whether it's tied to the smaller story, whether it's tied to the overstory. And I think we also need to sort of check our terms here. There's a dungeon, then there's a mega dungeon.
Yes.
Right. Tomb of Horrors is a dungeon. White Plume Mountain was a dungeon. Temple of Elemental Evil was a mega dungeon. It was several dungeons stacked on each other. Under Mountain is a mega dungeon, several stacked on top of each other. So to do a dungeon is one thing. You can have a single story in a dungeon, and you can get away with it. 30, 40 rooms, maybe. But when you're talking about different levels where it's a 1 to 20 campaign, all within that dungeon, you better stack the narrative pretty nicely, and you better come up with encounters that are super fascinating, that players can't wait to see what the next one's going to bring.
I think that's a fair point you raised, Shawn, is that we kind of got into the theoretical and philosophical without really establishing our hard mechanical terms of what a mega dungeon is. I think for those who've never played in one, a mega dungeon is often the setting of the entire campaign, maybe except for a town outside it that you might retreat to rest and sell loot in. And it's also vastly interconnected. It has multiple levels and multiple means of entering each level. Sometimes, a pit in the top level of the dungeon will drop you all the way down to, the 4th, if you can survive the 300-foot fall, for example. Multiple stairs or elevators or teleporters or anything that connects back. It's why when I talk about mega dungeons, I talk about Dark Souls and Metroid, because they're known in the video game world for this sort of deep level of interconnectivity. I think they're maybe the most accessible way of understanding the way that these structures as giant puzzle boxes work. And with that in mind, Ben from Beyond, not the grave, Ben from Beyond the podcast left us with another question about it, which is, would we call the city of Drakenheim, from our Dungeons of Drakenheim book, a mega dungeon? It is a city, which by necessity has a lot of interconnection within it. It has dungeon-like elements. It's a very dangerous place with lots of encounters and treasures to be found in it. Is that a mega dungeon, or is that something a little bit different?
I think it is what would be somewhere between a dungeon and a mega dungeon that is a little more story-driven, faction-driven. It has those elements. It has some of the cool elements of a mega dungeon. But I think the stories that pull you back out might be stronger than the story of the dungeon itself. And so therefore it is a mega campaign that has dungeons within it, I guess is the best way of describing it.
A kilo dungeon, says JP Speeds. Let's see. We got about 5 minutes left. I think we could, if we really wanted to get into the weeds on mega dungeons, there's more we could say, but let's talk about something a little bit more artistic and subjective here. You all have your copies of the 2024 Monster Manual, don't you?
Mm-hmm.
What's that look, Dael? Do you not happen to have
this copy? Is me realizing what you're about to ask, but I prepped for this question like 2 weeks ago, and I no longer remember what my answer is, and it was on my laptop, which is so far away from me.
Think of it quick, Dael, because what I'm about to ask is, what is your favorite painting / illustration in the brand new Monster Manual?
I'm going to start with the ancient green dragon, which I'm holding.
Yeah.
Green dragon, who looks to be attacking a party that's standing on the top of a tower. And then you realize, thanks to the ancient green dragon's powers, that it's actually making illusions of these adventurers rather than attacking the figures. So kudos to the artist on that one. Mm-hmm. I also, just in terms of, I love a little silliness, and I know how to spell. How do you spell H? I'm going to go to the hill giant right there. It shows 2 hill giants chasing away, it looks like maybe halflings, out of their village, while one of them is holding a cow, not the villager, the giant, holding it by one leg like it is a side of beef, which technically it's 2 sides of beef, but who's counting? So I loved it's not silly, but it has that more cartoonish, I guess, quality, which I like a bit.
I love that a lot of monster illustrations in this book are kind of doing double duty. They often have multiple things going on in it, like like this mimic art, where the more you look, the more mimics you find. The treasure chest is there to show you, but the painting is a mimic. The contents of the barrel is a mimic. I'm sure if I looked really close, I'd see mimics in the walls. Yeah, look, the doorway is a mimic. I love it. That adventure is screwed. There's no way out for this one. The helmet is a mimic. The chair is a mimic. It's all mimics all the way down. And boy, is that instructive to a DM.
The family reunion you don't want to walk in on.
Now imagine encountering that in a mega dungeon.
Right. Exactly. That's an encounter you'll be talking about forever.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm flipping through trying to find, because I remember loving a lot of the humanoids, like the new sort of separate categories that are in there, like bandits. I really liked the art for the bandits. I remember really liking the art for, like, I think the guards. There's just a lot of the nobility artwork. There was just kind of a lot of character thrown in there. The knights. So a lot of that sort of, category of person.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and it just feels really, really cool. And then the other one, apart from, as Shawn already pointed out, that the dragon art is really, really cool. I love the bullywugs. They look so good. I have never cared about them before because I'm not, again, Ben Byrne isn't here to back me up, but thank you so much. Look at them. I'm usually so not for the silly goofy slapstick doobity-doobity-boo. So I've never looked twice at a bullywug, but this makes me love them. I want to meet those guys. No, I really that's maybe my favorite single piece in the book.
I want to throw in a mention for a monster that I have almost never seen used in 5th edition. And I think it's because its Monster Manual art from 2014 let it down. The Periton. This.
Oh, yeah.
There we go. I really love this. It's in its lore, it's this heart-stealing beast, or that also steals shadows from the creatures that it kills.
Well, so mythologically, right? So the Periton was supposedly a creature that existed on Atlantis, and when Atlantis sunk because it had wings, it was able to escape. But there was this whole sort of connection where, because it has no like homeland, I don't know, there's this really weird thing. And so there's the idea that a Periton has the shadow of a man until it kills one. Was what I read when I was first learning about Peritons. And so it was really cool to see that repped.
Well, yeah, in its 2014 art, it was just, on a white background. You couldn't see its coolest feature. And now, because of this full art, we get it.
In the very first monster manual, it wasn't as colorful and as expressive as this, obviously. But that monster, it showed just this winged creature and then the shadow of a man. But it really didn't explain it. And it was the strangest thing. So unless you knew the mythology of it, you're just like, why? And it was a spectacularly strange way to present it. So I love that we get a more expressive view of it now.
Thematically, too, I like the sort of ancient world vibe that it gives, given that it's a classical mythology creature with Atlantean ties. I love the sort of crested helmet we get. I love the sort of bas relief mural we have in the background. It all feels like it really is showcasing the origin of this creature.
I want to bring up as well, I made a video about this not that long ago, but I only fairly recently found out that online on D&D Beyond, there's the monster manual, but if you go to the individual monster pages using the link, that there's a comment section under each monster. And reading through the comments on the 2014 Monster Manual was so funny to me. But my favorite thing was how often someone would leave a comment on something that wasn't a ghost that said, looks like a ghost. And so I, of course, went and left a comment underneath the actual ghost that said, looks like a ghost. And I was really pleased that after I made that video, a bunch of people came in and just started writing, looks like a ghost, looks like a ghost. And that I had to get in first on the new Monster Manual. So if you see comment number 1, baby, looks like a ghost.
It's a very sort of Elden Ring message vibe to it. Could this be dog?
Dog?
Speaking of leaving cryptic messages, you too can send us a viewer email at, what is it, Dael?
It's podcast@ghostfiregaming.com.
I will trust that you're correct about that, because as if you know me, I can never remember that email address.
You can talk to us on YouTube and Spotify now.
Absolutely. There are comment sections there where you too can say, looks like a ghost. Fire Gaming Podcast. Yes, I think I've done Ben's job well enough for him this week. Get me out of here, I say. I've been James Hake. This has also been Dael Kingsmill and Shawn Merwin. It has been lovely hosting for you this week, Lorecats. For that, I say, we'll sign off. See you next week.
Ba-da-da-ba-ba-da-ba.
Ba-ba-da-ba.
Ba-ba-da-ba-ba-da.
Ba-ba-da-ba.
Benedict-ba-ba-da.
Benedict-ba-ba-da.
Yeah.
Benedict.
Yes, thank you for hosting, James.
Of course.
Appreciate it.
No, it was great. I love to talk, so.